Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So I just wanted to do a quick video. You guys may have seen there were two other videos, one where I talk about a treatment, some antibiotics that I had to go on for an infection, and then another video that I did talking specifically about that infection. And I did talk about some of the tests that I did to either to detect that infection or to detect, what was going on in the vaginal microbiome. And I kind of wanted to just do a short video to be more specific about those tests. There are at-home tests, and I've done at-home tests in the past for your gut microbiome and stuff like that, and I just didn't like them at all. I thought they were useless tests. And when I picked the first test up, the Evvy test, I had already done, the PCR test through urgent care. And so I was relying on that one for results. But I also decided to get the Evvy test because it's supposed to test your entire microbiome. The PCR test that they ran at urgent care was only going to check for, STDs and, specific types of infections. It wasn't going to test your entire microbiome. The Evvy test, and it's EVVY, tests for everything. It tests for, actually you can add on another test for STIs, but since I had already gotten that checked with the PCR test, I just did the basic Evvy test, which tests your vaginal microbiome. And then I also did a MicrogenDx test, and that was a couple weeks after I completed the antibiotics. And so I kind of just wanted to give you guys a quick comparison, to tell you kind of, I guess, the pros and cons and just kind of how I felt about these tests. Because, I think there are some advantages and disadvantages to each. I do want to say, though, if you have an infection or if you suspect an infection, first go check out my video where I talk about my ureaplasma infection, because I feel like that one kind of gives you a thorough like what you need to do if you suspect that you may have that infection, or if you've been having recurrent infections for a long time. That kind of gives you the breakdown. This video, I'm just going to be specific to these tests. I do recommend that you go and get a PCR test at your doctor's office or your urgent care, and be very specific that you want a PCR test if you have those infections, if you're symptomatic, and if it's just been going on for a long time. Because these tests will miss things. They're good tests. I'm not going to say that they're not good tests, but they will miss things. I did the Evvy test. So my first Evvy test I did after I got the results from the PCR from urgent care. The PCR from urgent care did show that I had ureaplasma parvum and ureaplasma ureolyticum plus some BV. I did the Evvy test before starting antibiotics because I wanted to see, I think I was waiting to do the antibiotics, but I had the Evvy test, so I thought, okay, this is going to be a good way to sort of compare, how good this test is, because I had read that the Evvy test missed things. It did miss things. It missed the ureaplasma, both ureaplasma strains. Did not detect those at all. It detected a lot of other things. So it detected my good bacteria that I had in my microbiome, and it detected some bad bacteria, mostly BV related bacteria. And by the way, we are talking about the vaginal microbiome. We're not talking about the gut microbiome. I will do another video related to the gut microbiome, because that comes later, and I have some interesting stuff to talk about with that. So the Evvy test missed the UP and the UU infections, and I had not done any antibiotics at this point. So the results should have been similar to the PCR test I had done in urgent care. The only thing that they both detected was BV. And the BV, they were both pretty accurate for BV, because I think the PCR test showed moderate quantities of BV, and so did the Evvy test. So in that regard, the Evvy test was pretty spot on. But it also tells you your good bacteria and how much of your good bacteria you have. And so I got a good idea of, the good stuff that I had going and how much of that I had. So the Microgen test, I didn't do the Microgen test until after I finished the antibiotics. So I can't really say whether the Microgen test is comparable to Evvy or to the PCR test. I think the PCR test is still the best of the best. The PCR with an antibiogram. Go watch my other video if you want to know what all of that is. PCR plus antibiogram, I think, is just the gold standard if you want to pick up on these specific types of infections like ureaplasma and other types of STDs. So the Microgen test I did 2 weeks after I finished my antibiotics. I was told to retest for ureaplasma at 4 weeks, but the gynecologist told me to do the Microgen test 2 weeks, or as soon as I got it, which was like 2 weeks after. So the Microgen test only detected 2 bacteria, 2 vaginal bacteria. And I think it basically detected, from what I gather with this test, it detected certain bacteria that was at a certain level. I don't think it was going to detect in the vaginal microbiome because it's also a urine and vaginal test. So that's kind of the plus with the Microgen test, is that it also does a urine test. So it detected some microbes in the urine test. But I'm focusing on the vaginal test because the Evvy test is only vaginal and the PCR test was only vaginal. So the Microgen test did show just two bacteria, 1 good bacteria, 1 bad bacteria. I think it was like Lactobacillus gasseri and Prevotella bivia. So Prevotella is associated with BV, but it's not your typical BV. BV is typically Gardnerella. On the Evvy test, it detected several different strains of Gardnerella plus the Prevotella. So, I'm kind of just like, okay, which is which. I assumed, because the Microgen test I did after the antibiotics, I figured I killed everything. And the gynecologist was sort of in agreement with me. She's like, you killed everything. There's nothing left except for those 2 bacteria, and they were just in moderate quantities. So not even high or low, just like medium. So I assumed that I had killed everything. I ordered another Evvy test just to see if it was comparable now to the Microgen. So now I was going to do the Microgen after antibiotics and the Evvy test after antibiotics. The Evvy test I did do after I got my first negative PCR. So I went back to urgent care and got the first negative, the PCR done again, and that was negative. So the ureaplasma was cleared as well as the BV. So I got the Evvy test and I thought to myself, I'm going to do the Evvy test and it's only going to come up with a few bacteria because I killed everything. I did the Evvy test, the second Evvy test, and it was very similar to the first Evvy test where it showed the same good bacteria, same bad bacteria in almost similar quantities. I had killed off some of the bad bacteria, but they were still there, a lot of the Gardnerella bacteria. So I don't know what the difference is. I did say that, Microgen does DNA sequencing and PCR in the urine. Evvy uses metagenomic sequencing. I don't know what the difference is between those two, but the Evvy test seems to pick up on even very, very small quantities. I think the Microgen test is just focused on picking up the big stuff, like whatever is in larger quantities or in really easily detectable quantities, which was Lactobacillus gasseri and Prevotella bivia. I think what the health coach told me was that Evvy detects like DNA, like any remnants of DNA of bacteria. I don't know, but I still think the Evvy test is really good to have done because it can show you. It was showing me all of these different bacteria and also in the percentages. So it gives you percentages of the bacteria, how much of each one, and even the breakdown, because some bacteria have been started to become broken down into like subtypes. So you can have Lactobacillus gasseri, but there's other subtypes. And so they give you the subtypes and the percentage of each. And the same thing with Gardnerella. There's different Gardnerellas that they've broken down and they give you the breakdown of each, like the percentage. So the good thing with the Evvy test is that you get the percentages, I guess, as close to exact as they can get them. And so okay, I have 40% of this one, 20% of this one, 9% of this one. So I got to compare my first Evvy test before the antibiotics to my second Evvy test after the antibiotics. And I got to compare the percentages. And you can actually log into your Evvy account and it'll show you from the first one to the second one, it'll show you which ones went down and which ones went up. And I think it even gives you like the percentage that it went up and down. So you actually get to see a breakdown of that. It makes me wonder though how good the MicroGen test is like over $300, whereas the Evvy test is like around $100, I think. Like if you get the subscription, you can get it, I think, for even less. So I'm thinking the Evvy test didn't detect the urea plasma. I wonder if the MicroGen would have detected it. The PCR is still the most reliable for stuff like that. But then the MicroGen only detected 2 big bacteria, while the Evvy test still gave me a breakdown of everything. So I do think the Evvy is good, I think, if you're not having active infections. I think the Evvy is good if you're not experiencing active symptoms, and if you just want to see maybe like after antibiotic use, maybe you become sexually active or you're having unprotected sex and you want to see how that's affecting your microbiome. I think the Evvy test is good for that kind of stuff. It's good for maintenance. I wouldn't say it's a good test to diagnose anything. There is an STI panel. I did not have the STI panel done because I already knew that I didn't have any STIs. My bigger concern was the urea plasma, and the BV, which is the Gardnerella that it detected. So Evvy is good. It's an at-home test. You can get it mailed to your home. It's like $100. You can get like a subscription where you get 4 of them per year so that you can keep track. So it's a good test to keep track, especially if you're taking probiotics. Like I said, if you're having sex, if you took antibiotics, it's a good test to see how those things are affecting you. It's good for maintenance. I wouldn't use it for STDs or for any infections, especially if you've been having recurrent infections. Get a PCR, go to the doctors, push for a PCR, push for an antibiogram, push for all of that stuff. Don't rely on the Evvy test. I wouldn't even rely on the MicroGen test, to be honest. Even though the MicroGen test is used more by doctors, that was what a gynecologist, an out-of-network gynecologist, asked me to do that test instead, which I kind of thought was not as good as the PCR anyways. So yeah, I would definitely, Evvy is just maintenance. The MicroGen test, if you're desperate and if you're not getting, answers from a doctor, they don't want to run a PCR, or they're just running the basic tests where they just check for yeast infection or BV, then yeah, if you're desperate and you have the money, get the MicroGen test and see if it'll detect these infections. But as far as, from my experience, if you can, push for a PCR at your doctor's office and have them do the swab and all of that, have them send it out, have them test for everything under the sun. And my PCRs were covered by my insurance, and I had 2 of them done by that urgent care, because I had the first one that detected the infection, and then the second one, I think 4 to 5 weeks after, to see if I had cleared the infection. The MicroGen test had already showed me that I had cleared the infection 2 weeks after, but again, I didn't trust the test, and I had also been told to test 4 to 6 weeks after my last antibiotic, and so that's why I returned to the urgent care. So, Evvy versus MicroGen, like I said, Evvy is good to keep track, and it's more affordable than the MicroGen to be keeping track. If you want to test your urine, if you're having urinary symptoms like UTI type symptoms, the MicroGen test is probably really good because that one does PCR testing on your urine. And it did detect like some weird microbes in my urine that was really interesting. But the doctor didn't really seem too focused on that because I was having, because my issues were vaginal. I was having vaginal symptoms, and I was still having vaginal symptoms even after completing the antibiotics. So that's kind of my 2 cents on these tests. There is another test. There's another company that does like the same thing as Evvy, where you get your at-home test and you do it at home. I forgot what they were called. But the Evvy test is nice because you also get a health coach. So with each test that you do, you get to talk to a health coach, and they talk to you about things that you can do. So for example, I did tests. I still had a lot of Gardnerella, which is the bacteria that causes BV. I had Gardnerella and Prevotella in lower quantities than my good bacteria. So that's probably why I'm not symptomatic with BV. But they tell you, the health coaches have actually been very, very helpful. They tell you what you can do to get those numbers down and what the current science is telling you. They're not doctors, but they're usually like nutritionists and stuff like that. They have that kind of a background, and they will tell you like what you can do to get that under control. What they recommended to me, both health coaches, I had 2 different health coaches with each test, but it was like the same thing. They were just like, boric acid will kill the biofilm, so that biofilm, that will allow you to kill off the bacteria if you do antibiotics. So you have to do the boric acid first to weaken that biofilm and then kill the bacteria with antibiotics, or with, I guess, whatever else you want to use. So they tell you, they're like, we recommend that you get that bad bacteria as low as possible. That way you don't have a recurrence, because any bad bacteria can make you more vulnerable to getting a recurrence of another infection, whether it's the ureaplasma or bacterial vaginosis or anything like that. So I like that. I don't know if the Microgen, again, was the doctor told me to get it done, so she went over those results with me, but I kind of felt like, I could have just done the $100 test and gotten a health coach to tell me basically the same thing. So yeah, it was I don't know, it was the Microgen, I felt, was kind of a waste of money, to be honest, especially since I was going to go back and get the PCR anyways. The Evvy test I have actually found helpful, and I'm going to continue to do Evvy tests. I have one more Evvy test, that I'm going to do later on once I start rebuilding the microbiome and doing all of that, because I have enjoyed the test, and I like that I can log in and see, everything, the numbers compared and all of that. It's just all there for me. And you can even print out your results. I have a printout here, and it gives you, a chart with everything. So I would recommend Evvy. If you're just wanting to see how it's going down there, if you just did antibiotics and all of that, if there are some changes that you're going through, that's a good one. But if you have an infection, I wouldn't trust either one of these tests. I would go to the doctors, harass them for a PCR, tell them to run every test under the sun, plus an antibiogram. The Microgen also does do an antibiogram. So the Microgen will show you what antibiotics will work on each bacteria. So that's the advantage of the Microgen test, but it has to detect the bacteria. And that's the issue, is that it didn't detect my other BV strains. It only detected the Prevotella, and then it showed me what antibiotics would be effective against it. So that's the advantage of the Microgen test. But again, if you have active infection and active symptoms, ask for that PCR, the PCR and the antibiogram. So that's all I've got to say. I hope this is helpful for you guys. Please watch my other videos, the one where I talk about the ureaplasma infection, and the other one that I talk about treatment and some of the side effects that I've been having from that. And yeah, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.